This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read and recorded by William Kuhn, October 2006. The First and the Last, a drama in 3 scenes, by John Galsworthy. Persons of the play: Keith Darrant, K.C., Larry Darrant, his brother. Wanda. Scene 1. It is 6 o'clock of a November evening in Keith Darrant's study. A large, dark curtained room, where the light from a single reading lamp falling on a Turkey carpet, on books beside a large armchair, on the deep blue and gold coffee service, makes a sort of oasis before a log fire. In red Turkish slippers and an old brown velvet coat, Keith Darrant sits asleep. He has a dark, clean-cut, clean-shaven face, dark, grizzling hair, dark, twisting eyebrows. The curtain door, away out in the dim part of the room behind him, is opened so softly that he does not awake. Larry Darrant enters and stands half lost in the curtain over the door. A thin figure with a worn, high cheek-boned face, deep sunk blue eyes, and wavy hair all ruffled, a face which still has a certain beauty. He moves inwards along the wall, stands still again, and utters a gasping sigh. Keith stirs in his chair. Keith. Who's there? Larry, in a stifled voice. Only I, Larry. Keith, half-waked. Come in. I was asleep. He does not turn his head, staring sleepily at the fire. The sound of Larry's breathing can be heard. Turning his head a little. Well, Larry, what is it? Larry comes skirting along the wall as if craving its support outside the radius of the light. Staring. Are you ill? Larry stands still again and heaves a deep sigh. Keith, rising with his back to the fire and staring at his brother. What is it, man? Then, with a brutality born of nerves suddenly ruffled. Have you committed a murder that you stand there like a fish? Larry, in a whisper. Yes, Keith. Keith, with vigorous disgust. By Jove, drunk again. In a voice changed by sudden apprehension. What do you mean by coming here in this state? I told you, if you weren't my brother. Come here where I can see you. What's the matter with you, Larry? With a lurch, Larry leaves the shelter of the wall and sinks into a chair in the circle of light. Larry. It's true. Keith steps quickly forward and stares down into his brother's eyes, where is a horrified wonder, as if they would never again get on terms with his face. Keith, angry, bewildered, in a low voice. What in God's name is this nonsense? He goes quickly over to the door and draws the curtain aside to see that it is shut, then comes back to Larry, who is huddling over the fire. Come, Larry, pull yourself together and drop exaggeration. What on earth do you mean? Larry, in a shrill outburst. It's true, I tell you. I've killed a man. Keith, bracing himself coldly. Be quiet. Larry lifts his hands and wrings them, utterly taken aback. Why come here and tell me this? Larry. Whom should I tell, Keith? I came to ask what I'm to do. Give myself up, or what? Keith. When? What? Larry. Last night. Keith. Good God, how? Where? You'd better tell me quietly from the beginning. Here, drink this coffee. It'll clear your head. He pours out and hands him a cup of coffee. Larry drinks it off. Larry. My head. Yes, it's like this, Keith. There's a girl. Keith. Women. Always women with you. Well? Larry. A Polish girl. Her father died over here when she was 16 and left her all alone. There was a mongrel living in the same house who married her, or pretended to. She's very pretty, Keith. He left her with a baby coming. She lost it, and nearly starved. Then another fellow took her on, and she lived with him 2 years, till that brute turned up again and made her go back to him. He used to beat her black and blue. He left her again when I met her. She was taking anybody then. He stops, passes his hand over his lips, looks up at Keith, and goes on defiantly. I never met a sweeter woman, or a truer, that I swear. Woman, she's only 20 now. When I went to her last night, that devil had found her out again. He came for me, a bullying, great, hulking brute. Look! He touches a dark mark on his forehead. I took his ugly throat, and when I let go... He stops, and his hands drop. Keith. Yes? Larry, in a smothered voice. Dead, Keith. I never knew till afterwards that she was hanging on to him, to help me. Again he wrings his hands. Keith, in a hard, dry voice. What did you do then? Larry. We sat by it a long time. Keith. Well? Larry. Then I carried it on my back down the street, round a corner, to an archway. Keith. How far? Larry. About 50 yards. Keith. Did anyone see? Larry. No. Keith. What time? Larry. 3 in the morning. Keith. And then? Larry. Went back to her. Keith. Why, in heaven's name? Larry. She was lonely and afraid. So was I, Keith. Keith. Where is this place? Larry. 42 Borough Square, Soho. Keith. And the archway? Larry. Corner of Glove Lane. Keith. Good God! Why, I saw it in the paper this morning. They were talking of it in the courts. He snatches the evening paper from his armchair and runs it over and reads. Here it is again. Body of a man was found this morning under an archway in Glove Lane. From marks about the throat, grave suspicion of foul play are entertained. The body had apparently been robbed. My God! Suddenly he turns. You saw this in the paper and dreamed it. Do you understand, Larry? You dreamed it. Larry, wistfully. If only I had, Keith. Keith makes a movement of his hands almost like his brother's. Keith. Did you take anything from the body? Larry, drawing an envelope from his pocket. This dropped out while we were struggling. Keith, snatching it and reading it. Patrick Whelan. Was this his name? Simon's Hotel, Ferrier Street, London. Stooping, he puts it in the fire. No, that makes me... He bends to pluck it out, stays his hand, and stamps it suddenly further in with his foot. What in God's name made you come here and tell me? Don't you know I'm within an ace of a judgeship? Larry, simply. Yes, you must know what I ought to do. I didn't mean to kill him, Keith. I love the girl. I love her. What shall I do? Keith. Love. Larry, in a flash. Love. That swinish brute. 1,000,000 creatures die every day, and not one of them deserves death as he did. But I feel it here, touching his heart. Such an awful clutch, Keith. Help me if you can, old man. I may be no good, but I've never hurt a fly if I could help it. He buries his face in his hands. Keith. Steady, Larry. Let's think it out. You weren't seen, you say? Larry. It's a dark place, and dead night. Keith. When did you leave the girl again? Larry. About 7. Keith. Where did you go? Larry. To my rooms. Keith. To Fitzroy Street? Larry. Yes. Keith. What have you done since? Larry. Sat there, thinking. Keith. Not been out? Larry. No. Keith. Not seen the girl? Larry shakes his head. Will she give you away?